So, the Avro Arrow as a feasible replacement for the CF-18. Now, this is going to be kind of a strange video in the sense of I think some of the things overlooked, but is it really would the Arrow be the best plane to replace the CF-18? To tell you the truth, probably not. I think the best airplane to replace the CF-18, strangely enough, will be the CF-18. Now, here's the thing: the reason why the Arrow is so well suited for Canada is, number one, it was designed in Canada, it was built in Canada, and it was made by Canadians. And it also met all the, well, didn't get a chance to meet all the requirements of the RCAF, but it was designed for the RCAF, meaning it wasn't a compromise airplane. It was designed to do a specific job, or actually a couple of jobs. Now, oh, sorry, just getting with the whistle here. Okay, the thing is that the I think it's Bordeaux Industries. They were talking, and they have a neat little video of making a fifth generation Avro Arrow. Now, there's some good things about that idea, but there's also some bad things about that idea. The people that advocate for rebuilding the Arrow as Canada's frontline fighter, I think, kind of go off the deep end a little bit when they're thinking about that. Like for example, I would be in favor of it if they didn't stray too far from the original concept. And here's why: because once you start getting into forward canards or V-tails, all that stuff, fly-by-wire to the point where the thing is trying to basically make a brick fly, then you've lost all the simplicity advantage that the original Arrow actually had. Now that said, the original Arrow was actually quite complex for what it was for its time. Some say it was an extraordinary airplane, some say it was ordinary. But I think as the overall package, it actually had so much potential, and it would have been the start. This is Aero 206, which when I worked at the Aviation Museum, I sat in that nose quite a few times. It definitely wouldn't have been a good dogfighting airplane just because you can't see very well in it. And I'm telling you this from experience from a man who's actually sat in the nose of the Avro Arrow. But I think as an interceptor to shoot down bombers, it would have done that more than fine. And I also think, too, that in its original configuration, which it was designed to actually, although Canada never had nukes, we basically were going to, we had nukes donated from the United States that were, we were going to basically have missile launched nukes off the Arrow. And a lot of people don't like to talk about that aspect, but during the Cold War, that was one of the big things about it, right? So with that going, if you start to redesign the airplane to over redesign, you're pretty much going to a completely new airplane. Now that said, 1959 technology probably wouldn't stand up too well today. Obviously, you'd have to update the radar, you'd have to make better visibility, you'd have to build the airplane out of better composites to be able to get the thing above Mach 3, if even Mach 3 would even really be required. To tell you the truth, if I were to redesign the Arrow, I would kind of keep the airframe the same way it is. Again, just make better visibility in the cockpit, make it a tandem cockpit that you could also use the thing as a trainer, or you could have a weapons officer in the background, or all kinds of, I'd have it so you could set it up different ways, of course, but I'd also keep the airframe as simplistic as possible, only modify what will make the airplane lighter and stronger and simpler to lower the maintenance as much as possible. I don't know what kind of a maintenance schedule the Arrow would have had. It probably would have been pretty high. I mean, a starfighter of the day, a CF-104 starfighter, basically for every 1 hour flown, you're looking at 15 hours of routine maintenance. And these are some other photos from the Aviation Museum. I've sat in most of these airplanes when I worked there. The thing is that the maintenance, again, nobody really knows what it would cost to keep the airplane flying. A CF-18, for example, for every 1 hour flown is about 12 hours of routine maintenance. So that said, this is where you can really win out with a stable airframe, and basically you can lower your maintenance. But other things such as, again, with the radar cone being as big as it is, there's no modern day fighter that's out there right now that has a radar cone quite that large. So you'd be able to pack all kinds of things in there. So you could truly make this almost a multi-role aircraft and of course you would add some sort of a main cannon. I'd probably stick with the 25 millimeter, just because Canada already uses that. A 30 millimeter I think is overkill for an interceptor. 20 millimeter I think is a little bit underpowered for if you wanted to use it in a tank busting role. That's why I think the best compromise, or you could have interchangeable nose sections, making it like an A10, or putting it like almost like a electronics warfare airplane. So you could do a lot of things, but I would keep the basic platform as simple as possible. Again, only restructure or redesign to make the airplane lighter and more maneuverable for its size. You're looking at 39,000 parts that the airplane had. I'm sure if designers looked at the plans now, which the airplane was well built, don't get me wrong, the airplane went into production without a prototype. That was one of the things. Everything had to be perfect on the airplane in order to do this. So there wasn't a lot of trial and error. It was just basically design, and this is what took up probably so much of the time, was that they had to get everything so perfect so that when they went right into production, they didn't even bother having a test airplane, technically. So with that, if you had the airplane designed for Canada, well, first off, the internal bomb bay is a major plus. The second thing that would be a major plus is the amount of wing area, which could help you in maneuverability in the long run if you could lighten the airplane down and make sure it was strong enough to withstand higher G loads. So some restructuring of the airplane would be needed, but the overall design would be simplistic, better materials, again lighter, longer lasting, lower maintenance. So you could really get a huge advantage out of it. So that's kind of how I would view it. And of course, whether to make it a Mach 3 airplane or not, is it needed? There's so few Mach 3 interceptors out there right now that Mach 2.5 is plenty fast. I would actually even Mach 2 is plenty fast if you could cruise at Mach 2. I would put more emphasis on range, climb rate, and fuel economy. That would be the big ones. Well, I guess that would cover range. And low maintenance. The Arrow did cruise quite fast. This is something when you hear some people that are critics of the Arrow say, well, it was just kind of a boring airplane. It didn't do anything that other airplanes could do. Yes, there were other airplanes that could fly faster than it, but not they couldn't cruise as fast as the Arrow, for its time. And the ones that could only do it for a few minutes. They couldn't stay at 600 miles an hour for 3 hours, 4 hours. The Arrow could. It was a big airplane. It had lots of fuel, 2,900 gallons internally. Which is a lot of fuel. So this is why with today's technology, you could take the same powered engines and you could gear that power to be for climbing, or you could gear it for top end speed. There's a lot of things you could do, or you could just have it so that it's as economical as possible, so that you get the most range. On an airplane that size, you should at least be able to get at least 1 mile per gallon, which that's what the CF-18 gets. If you could get 2 miles per gallon on 2,900 gallons of fuel, wow, you would basically have an interceptor with the range of an airliner. That would be very useful for Canada, and it also, if it had the capability to supercruise, which all this stuff is achievable now. It's very achievable. Where people I think drop the ball is once they start saying, okay, we're going to make a stealth version, but then you're completely redesigning the airplane to the point where it's a completely new concept airplane, and it has to be proven. Well, the Arrow's already been proven. The concept has already been proven. It's already had a few, I think 68 flights, I think was the total, or 68 hours of flying. Don't quote me on those numbers, I kind of forget. But again, cruising a little over 600 miles an hour, even the CF-18 doesn't do that. So that type of thing. Climbing to 50,000 feet is obviously no problem with this for this airplane. Now, you have to understand, okay, the CF-18 fully loaded pretty much climbs 2 miles a minute, or about 10,000 feet a minute. The Arrow could climb 5 miles a minute fully loaded. So that's, again, the F4 Phantom climbed about 8 miles a minute, but that wasn't fully loaded. I think it would have been very comparable to the F4 Phantom of the day. it just it was very very similar. But even at that, the F4 Phantom didn't cruise quite as fast as the Arrow. Arrow had almost double the wing area, and that wing area is what really gives you the difference. The only modern day fighter that has pretty much the same amount of wing area as the Avro Arrow is an Su-27, which has about 1,200 square feet of wing. I think the Arrow is 1,260 square feet. They also flirted with the idea of a 1,400 square foot wing area, but it depended what they wanted to do. So again, you got a nice stable airplane that's very streamlined. Again, if you could give it the range of an airliner and lighten the weight so that you could get very maneuverable with it. Although delta wing aircraft usually suffer a bit in the maneuverability aspect, but with a 60 plus degree backswing on the wing, those type of wings usually do well up high. So maybe not so good down low, but it does well up high. Now, whether to put forward canards on the airplane or not, I think again adds too much complexity. Although advantage and doable, but how much more would it add to the aircraft's complexity to redo it? Same with the twin tail versus the single tail. So I think the Arrow would be a very viable and actually cheaper alternative to the F-35, because you can put F-35 avionics in this thing. You don't even really have to reinvent the wheel. You don't even have to make it quite so big. You could, but you don't have to, because again, you can just take the design concept and run with it. And I think with modern day CNC machining and stuff like that, considering how well they built it in 1959, and everything would have been more done by hand, with modern day CNC machining, they could build probably one of these things in probably a relatively short amount of time. They could probably have a flying prototype within a couple of months. Again, depending on, maybe they'll pull engines out of CF-18, build the airframe, and that type of thing. They could take radars out of the CF-18 or F-35 radar technology, put it into it. Again, build a bubble canopy. The tooling and the jigs what takes the most, and of course the approval for the funding is what takes the most. But that said, I think in its original concept, built with modern day materials, better quality, lighter, more powerful, more reliable engines with better fuel economy, I think it would be a win-win aircraft. But if you could get the extra bonus of going Mach 3 plus, and the Arrow the design could do it. Now, a lot of people say, no, the Arrow never went that fast. You're right, it never went that fast, but the design could do it. In fact, when I think its first supersonic flight, the airplane got hot enough that it actually started to melt the decals on the wing, and they started to slide back on the wing a bit. And I've actually seen these winglets, or the remainders of the wings, that at the museum, and you can see that that the decals kind of slid back a bit on it, and that it was just basically heat warping. So obviously, the other thing about the Arrow too is the Arrow had a refrigeration system to keep the pilot from cooking to death, basically at supersonic speeds. No, I don't know of any other airplane that quite had that at that time. So again, a lot of airplanes, they could go supersonic, but they can only do it for a few minutes. Because of the heat buildup of the airplane. Aluminium typically melts at about 15 to 1800 degrees. So, this is why many airplanes from the 1950s and stuff like that, they could go supersonic, but they couldn't stay there. But again, modern materials, you can do that. So if you were flying around and you had better visibility in the airplane, more advanced radar and multi-rolled radar in the nose, with a lighter, lower maintenance airplane, again, with a range of an airliner and climbing XYZ miles per minute, not feet per minute, but miles per minute, to an altitude of almost 100,000 feet, which would be very achievable for this airplane in this day and age. Keep in mind, here's a picture of a starfighter here. The starfighter, remember, the CF-104 starfighter was very limited in a lot of ways. It held the altitude record in Canada to 103,000 feet. Time to climb. It broke an altitude record in the 1960s, I think. And again, the airplane being single engine, very short range and stuff like that, it was able to eventually get into the speeds that the Arrow was required to do. The thing is you couldn't do it for very, very long. But again, the Arrow could cruise very fast for a long time. It had between a 12 and 1800 mile range, so that's not too bad. In intercept mode, in full, it only had about a 300 or 400 mile range because you were in full afterburn. So it took off at about 185 miles an hour. So it was a big airplane and it handled like a big airplane. Roll rate I think was something like 150 to 120 degrees per second and 15 degrees of pitch and yaw, that type of thing. So it could turn a 3.5G turn at Mach 1.5 up at 50,000 feet without loss of speed or altitude, and it did do that. So that's still pretty good even by today's standards. So again, the potential's there. Again, a few tweaks and refinements, and anything that was overcomplicated. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that you probably wouldn't even have to put on the airplane now because of the newer technology. So I think that the potential is there if it was left closest to its original configuration with slight modifications, like I say, better materials, definitely better visibility, because when you get into the airplane, it's like a clamshell, like the SR-71. You get into it and there's like a divider in front of you, and you don't really see the divider, but you can't really see forward very well with it. And you can see, you can see out both sides of the windows, but it's like sitting at the back of a city bus. You just can't really see that well with it. So obviously, if you're going to have it as a fighter interceptor, you would definitely have to improve the visibility. If you were going to use it as a long-range bomber, that would be another thing. In fact, this thing would probably, to a Russian equivalent, it would probably be suited almost perfectly like an Su-34. You can make it kind of do those kind of things. So that said, I'm sure the debate of the Arrow is never going to go away. At some point, no matter what kind of technology is available, it just would not be a viable airplane to have. But I can tell you right now, if this thing was flying missions and cruising around for 10 hours at 600 miles an hour, it would. There's the wings there. I can't really see the decal. It's kind of moved back a bit but you have to get up close to it to see it. Only moved a little bit. So, but anyway, the idea is that if you had the loiter time. Again, what kind of versatility could you do with this airplane? You could make it a reconnaissance airplane, an interceptor, a bomber, a trainer, although it would be kind of an expensive trainer. You could do all kinds of things with it. So I think that would be why I'd say that it is a viable option. But I still think because we already have, where we lose that argument in favor or support of it is that the CF-18, for example, was built in Canada. The last one rolled off of the Bombardier line, I believe, in 1986-87, and that was our newest CF-18. So our CF-18s, there's nothing really wrong with them. They're just old. They're not stealthy. They have a few problems with, for example, because they're a small airplane, you can't put much on them. But we have the tooling. I'm sure we probably still have most of the tooling for the CF-18s. So we could retool for the CF-18s, make the airplane maybe a tad bit smaller, get rid of all the Navy stuff like the folding wings and tail hooks and stuff like that, because it's simply not needed. We don't have an aircraft carrier. And for the maintenance, extra maintenance and the extra weight of the airplane, we could be putting on more useful things on it. We could also take the CF-18 and put square nacelles on it, just to kind of stealthize the airplane in, a little more wing area and make it maybe a slightly more stable airframe, so doesn't have to be as heavily relied on fly-by-wire. Now, the Arrow was a fly-by-wire airplane, but it was still a stable airframe. So you can, fly-by-wire I don't see as a bad thing, but I also see it as, when you're trying to make a brick fly, and the Arrow is naturally stable, so it wouldn't be hard to make it fly. But the problem is if you take something like the F-35, that thing without fly-by-wire, you can't fly it. It's impossible to fly it. It's like trying to make a brick fly. You just, aerodynamic stability of a brick. So, which a lot of people say yes, but when you move your center of gravity and the fulcrum point back on an aircraft, it allows you to be light in pitch and gives you more agility, not necessarily more maneuverability, but more agility. Makes the airplane more responsive. But if you have too much pitch, or the weight balance too far back, then it's like you have to fly the airplane all the time. You can't just kind of relax with it, which makes it twitchy. So every airplane is always that kind of trade-off between twitchiness and stability. But the idea that you can't have both, I think, is disproved by, for example, early MiG-29s, which had not only super maneuverability and very agile and very responsive, but they were also stable airframes. The Su-27, for example, is not a stable airframe. Without fly-by-wire, you couldn't fly an Su-27 or Su-35 or any variant thereof, or the T-50, for example. They would just fall out of the sky because you would not be able to control them. You'd snap the wings off. So I believe that even if you didn't achieve, super maneuverability to say that of an Su-35, you could probably get enough maneuverability out of it to be more than competitive. And even at that, these like Su-35s and even the Su-20, F-22 airplanes like that, they are very maneuverable, but it's very rare that a pilot's going to actually have to utilize that kind of maneuverability anyway because of the missiles. If it's a guns only fight, then maybe sure, but a lot of times I don't think that's it's not what you normally see. So you could still have the airplane maneuverable enough, even if it wasn't quite as agile as say a MiG-29. It would still be agile enough to be more than a threat to the MiG-29. I think visibility counts for more than just about anything. The other thing to consider too is that with the older design, again with lower maintenance, you don't have to have a staff that's extremely highly trained to take care of the airplane. You can pretty much train a bunch of chimpanzees to take care of the thing, kind of like the A-10 or the Frogfoot. Just about anybody. You don't need the most tech savvy person to take care of those airplanes. They pretty much take care of themselves. Now, for example, the Su-25 Frogfoot, I think is why it's such a successful airplane for the Russians is the fact that you can belly land the thing with the wheels up. They'll jack it up, pop out some dents and clean the grass off the bottom, fuel it back up, and up you go again. It's like that. We had Grumman trackers, for example, and I remember a guy telling me at the museum when he was flying a Grumman tracker off of the Bonaventure aircraft carrier we used to have. And he said he was about to go off, and there was a guy ahead of him went off, and he went really low, and the guy actually smacked the water with the Grumman tracker. But he says it just kind of like skipped on the water and took back up into the air. He says it was a tough airplane because it was simple, right? Obviously, if you hit too hard, you'd probably kill yourself, but you get the idea. Some airplanes can take a bounce. So the Arrow can be built, to be also a very solid airplane too. Because of all the advantages of modern technology, better machining, all that stuff. So I think a better viability would probably still be the CF-18 because we already have a lot of the tooling, and we just, we've already got the, again, proof of concept. And again, this is a lot of what the Russians do. They don't reinvent the wheel. For example, they'll take an existing aircraft type and just kind of tweak it a bit. So you go from an Su-27 to an Su-33, which is a naval variant. Okay, but virtually the same type of airplane. Okay, well the Su-33 is pretty, slightly more hot-rodded, more powerful engines to get up into the air, a lot easier off an aircraft carrier. Okay, and then they make the Su-37, which is an even more hot-rodded version of the Su-27, and then they rename it the Su-35, which is their current frontline fighter now. And then when they wanted to make a stealth version, they make the T-50, which is still basically set up on that same basic chassis and airframe and engines. There's a lot of parts that are like on the T-50 that you can't just interchange parts between an Su-35 and a T-50, but there's a lot of stuff that is interchangeable, little stuff. So they don't necessarily reinvent the wheel, they just refine it. Well, that's what we'll be doing with the Arrow, and that's also what we could do with the CF-18, because again, we have probably most of the tooling. Now, the problem is Bombardier, a lot of it has moved to Mexico now, so that might be something to factor. But I believe that we could have a flying prototype within a 5-month span, maybe 8 months at the most, providing we had everything ready to go. Just because, again, for an aeronautical designer, the Arrow was a pretty simplistic design, and I think that's what made it work so well. For what it was. Did it have problems? Yeah, it had problems. It had some problems with the landing, forward landing gear doors. It had to, on its maiden flight, it basically was completely a flawless flight, and at some points when they were landing the airplane, it landed touchdown so lightly it wouldn't even set off the sensor pads to register the landing. It flew so well, because again it's such a stable airplane. And I think the pilot only called one kind of hiccup with the fly-by-wire system, where the airplane did a bit of a weird pitch up type of thing, and then nobody know what happened there. So other than that, pretty much, except for I think 202 ripped the landing gear off on a on a hard landing, on one hard landing. So next to that, the airplane, again, the proof of concept was there. So I think, I guess, just to kind of wrap it up, is again, when we look at all the new fighters, yes, it's easier for us to, for example, to buy the Eurofighter or buy the Rafale, or the F-35. But the F-35 problem is it's not even a fighter; it's an attack aircraft. Even the Australians admitted that it should be called an FA aircraft, not an F aircraft. Fighter attack. Doesn't mean it can't be used as a fighter, but it's definitely not a frontline fighter. It's an attack aircraft. The F-22, on the other hand, is a fighter, but at what cost? Like the F-22, an excellent airplane. Well, they're controversial airplanes. People that are fanboys of one airplane or the other will say, well, this airplane sucks, that airplane's not, doesn't, is good or it's bad or whatever. And the same with the Arrow. People criticize for this and praise it for that. So to me, I just look at it as, if we built it in our country, and this was the kind of the initial the initial belief system of the airplane, is by building it in our own country, keeping the money in our own country, which we're doing with our warships. So I don't know why we don't do the same thing with our own fighter aircraft. Problem is once you get the bureaucracy part of it in there, that's what really messes things up. It's well, they want this and they want that, and then next thing you know, you don't even have the you're not talking about an Arrow anymore. You're talking about an airplane that's so far different that it would take 20 years to put a fighter in the air. To me, if you look back in the 1950s, I mean, we're talking every couple of months there was a new type of fighter or interceptor or bomber or something coming out, and I'm like, with today's technology, there's no reason why we can't do the same. But again, it's not so much that they overbuild stuff as they overcomplicate stuff. They figure that it needs all kinds of bells and whistles. That doesn't really need. So you have a basic requirement, you meet that requirement, and you just refine what you already know, refine what you already have. And I think that's what we could do with the Arrow at some point. However, because of politicians' interests in and investments in this company, that company, whatever, it'll never get its fair shake. So maybe a Canadian company could do it. It would have to happen free enterprise. Obviously be sanctioned by the government, but it'd have to basically be like a SpaceX type of thing, where they get crowdfunding to build the project, and then they just build the project. Whether whereas if you had, which the thing too is, and this was also brought up, that if they allowed the Arrow to recompete for the replacement fighter, for the CF-18, then a lot of other designs would probably pop up out of the nowhere as well, and that would also have to be considered for proposals. And that would be true, because I'm sure there'd be something much better than the Arrow coming out as well. It's, again, a lot of people like the nostalgia of it, but there's a lot of people that probably have even smaller than the Arrow and larger than the CF-18, and somewhere in between there where they could build an aircraft that's much lower maintenance, lower cost, and get all the same performances out of it. Again, there's some brilliant people out there that come up with some great designs. But the thing I like about the Arrow is, because it is such a big airplane, it becomes automatically a high capability airplane, because you can use it as a fighter, you could use it as a bomber, you could use it as an interceptor, so you can carry maybe like 20 AIM-9s on it, or 16 or 18 AIM-120s, or maybe you have some really long range anti-radiation missiles that fire 100 miles, because you could put something really big on it. You could probably fire cruise missiles out of smaller cruise missiles out of it, just things that you couldn't, and plus all the conventional bombs and JDAMs that you could drop off of it. So just things you couldn't do with a regular CF-18 that you can't do now, that you could do with a potentially larger airplane, and yet still retain not only range, but you'd have, again, the maneuverability, the visibility, all that type of stuff. So I guess I'm going to leave it at that, and I'll let you guys kind of put your comments down below, and just chew on the idea, and what do you guys think of it? Again, a lot of people think it's a far-fetched idea, and other people say, no, it's feasible. I think it's feasible if we don't stray too far from the original design. Rather than reinvent the wheel, just kind of refine it and just make a modernized version, better parts, more fuel efficient, lower maintenance, higher powered engines, Super Cruise, Mach 3. Anything. I'd rather have Super Cruise than Mach 3 capability, because the Mach 3 capability, I'd make the airframe be definitely capable for that, but I don't think it's really as needed nowadays. Again, I think Super Cruises is a much more valuable thing to have than anything. Obviously, high altitude, make it as maneuverable as possible and as low maintenance as possible, and then of course design it to fire off just about any type of weapons. Maybe interchangeable nose cones to do different things. Maybe you want to be basically a communications radar up front. Maybe the other one will have like a Gatling gun, like an A10. Maybe another variation, and something that, okay, well, the airplane lands, you pull the nose off, you pick, what's the mission? Okay, well, you're going to do this, you're going to do that, and you pick different, radar jamming and equipment, stuff like that. So you could, make the airplane into so many different things. And stuff like that. So, all right, so I'll leave it at that. So if you like this kind of content, there'll be a link down below for anybody who would like to help support the channel. And thank you very much to everybody who has. So rate, subscribe, share, comment, like. Be true to yourself, be true to others, and always, always do the right thing. Have a great day. G'day, hi, and welcome. All right, so the Avro Arrow as a feasible replacement for the CF-18. Now, this is going to be kind of a strange video in the sense of I think some of the things overlooked, but is it really, would the Arrow be the best plane to replace the CF-18? To tell you the truth, probably not. I think the best airplane to replace the CF-18, strangely enough, will be the CF-18. Now, here's the thing. The reason why the Arrow is so well suited for Canada is, number one, it was designed in Canada, it was built in Canada, and it was made by Canadians. And it also met all the, well, didn't get a chance to meet all the requirements of the RCAF, but it was designed for the RCAF, meaning it wasn't a compromise airplane. It was designed to do a specific job, or actually a couple of jobs. Now, oh, sorry, just gotta get with the whistle here. Okay, the thing is that the I think it's Bordeaux Industries. They were talking, and they have a neat little video of making a fifth generation Avro Arrow. Now, there's some good things about that idea, but there's also some bad things about that idea. The people that advocate for rebuilding the Arrow as Canada's frontline fighter, I think, kind of go off the deep end a little bit when they're thinking about that. Like, for example, I would be in favor of it if they didn't stray too far from the original concept. And here's why: because once you start getting into forward canards or V-tails, all that stuff, fly-by-wire to the point where the thing is trying to basically make a brick fly. then you've lost all the simplicity advantage that the original Arrow actually had. Now that said, the original Arrow was actually quite complex for what it was for its time. Some say it was an extraordinary airplane, some say it was ordinary. But I think as the overall package, it actually had so much potential, and it would have been the start. This is Aero 206, which when I worked at the Aviation Museum, I sat in that nose quite a few times. It definitely wouldn't have been a good dogfighting airplane just because you can't see very well in it. And I'm telling you this from experience from a man who's actually sat in the nose of the Avro Arrow. But I think as an interceptor to shoot down bombers, it would have done that more than fine. And I also think, too, that in its original configuration, which it was designed to actually, although Canada never had nukes, we basically were going to, we had nukes donated from the United States that were, we were going to basically have missile launched nukes off the Arrow. And a lot of people don't like to talk about that aspect, but during the Cold War, that was one of the big things about it, right? So with that going, if you start to redesign the airplane to over redesign, you're pretty much going to a completely new airplane. Now that said, 1959 technology probably wouldn't stand up too well today. Obviously, you'd have to update the radar, you'd have to make better visibility, you'd have to build the airplane out of better composites to be able to get the thing above Mach 3, if even Mach 3 would even really be required. To tell you the truth, if I were to redesign the Arrow, I would kind of keep the airframe the same way it is. Again, just make better visibility in the cockpit, make it a tandem cockpit that you could also use the thing as a trainer, or you could have a weapons officer in the background, or all kinds of, I'd have it so you could set it up different ways, of course, but I'd also keep the airframe as simplistic as possible, only modify what will make the airplane lighter and stronger and simpler to lower the maintenance as much as possible. I don't know what kind of a maintenance schedule the Arrow would have had. It probably would have been pretty high. I mean, a starfighter of the day, a CF-104 starfighter, basically for every 1 hour flown, you're looking at 15 hours of routine maintenance. And these are some other photos from the Aviation Museum. I've sat in most of these airplanes when I worked there. The thing is that the maintenance, again, nobody really knows what it would cost to keep the airplane flying. A CF-18, for example, for every 1 hour flown is about 12 hours of routine maintenance. So that said, this is where you can really win out with a stable airframe, and basically you can lower your maintenance. But other things such as, again, with the radar cone being as big as it is, there's no modern day fighter that's out there right now that has a radar cone quite that large. So you'd be able to pack all kinds of things in there. So you could truly make this almost a multi-role aircraft